The wind howled through the storm-ravaged forest like the final breath of something ancient untold. A 6-year-old boy, his eyes far too deep for his age, knelt beneath the roots of a fallen mango tree, digging through cold, wet earth. He wasn't searching for treasure. He was searching for a life. "He told me to come here," the boy whispered. "The white dog from my dream." He didn't speak, but I understood. There's a baby waiting. And then they found the suitcase, the child, and underneath, a tuft of white fur, soft as snow. No one could explain it. But from that moment, a story began, not just about survival, but something far greater, a love that defies space-time, even death itself. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our thrilling, emotional, and unforgettable storytelling episodes. The screen fades in from black. A howling wind cuts through the silence, thin, high-pitched like something alive. Next to rural Queensland, post-storm, day. The landscape lies bruised and beaten. Queensland is not itself. Palm trees bow like broken prayers, roofs sit crooked or entirely gone, and debris paints the streets like chaotic brushstrokes. The camera drifts slowly over a flooded neighborhood. Sagging fences upside down. Bicycles, waterlogged toys floating like memories in a soup of mud and gasoline. In the distance, thunder rolls a low, reluctant grumble. The sky is a dull gray blue, heavy and metallic. Rain drizzles in a hush more like static than water. A battered truck pulls up beside a wrecked home. Its paint is scratched, the tires caked with thick brown clay. Interior truck cab, same time. Owen, 6 years old, sits in the back seat. He's thin, wiry. His bones look like they're still deciding whether to grow or stay small. He stares through the glass, not blinking. His face is blank, unreadable. There's something ancient in his eyes. Something that doesn't quite belong to a child. Exeter Owen's house. Moments later, the truck doors open. A man and a woman, Owen's parents, step out arguing in sharp, exhausted whispers. "Mom." Angry whisper. "We should have left earlier. You said we'd be fine." "Dad." "I didn't know the creek would rise like that." Owen steps out quietly. The mud sucks at his shoes. He moves with eerie stillness, not paying attention to the argument. He drifts toward the broken remains of their home. One side of the house has caved in. The front porch is split at an angle like a snapped jawbone. Water pools in the yard, dark and full of shattered tiles, floating stuffed animals, a pink toothbrush still wet. But Owen doesn't look at any of it. He's staring past the wreckage at a massive mango tree, collapsed sideways, roots exposed like the ribs of something dead. Its long branches still sway, gently creaking under their own weight. The ground around it is torn, mud churned and cracked open. The wind shifts. The branches groan. And for a moment, Owen narrows his eyes. Cut to black. Enter Owen's temporary bedroom. Night. The room is unfamiliar. Dim. The walls are bare. A borrowed mattress lies on the floor, still wrapped in plastic at the edges. The whir of a ceiling fan stutters every few seconds like it's trying to remember its rhythm. Owen lies awake. He doesn't cry. Doesn't move. Just stares at the ceiling, blinking once every long while. His parents argue again, distant, muffled behind a closed door. Words like insurance evacuation and Owen's not right poke through. Then silence. A low whimper breaks the stillness. Owen sits up. He listens. Another whimper, clearer this time, but it's not human. A dog. He climbs out of bed, silent as a leaf in winter. His bare feet pad across cold tile. He opens the window an inch. Outside, the wind picks up again, rustling leaves and playing with broken plastic bags. The night is thick with fog. The whimper becomes a whine, then a bark, soft and distant like it's coming through layers of fabric or time. Owen's breath catches. His eyes widen, not in fear, in recognition. He backs away from the window, turns, and standing there, inside the room now, is a white dog, large, elegant. Its fur glows faintly like it's been painted with moonlight. Its eyes are silver, glowing not in a scary way, but with a knowing warmth. The dog doesn't move, just stands in the fog that now curls at Owen's feet, though no fog came through the window. Owen doesn't speak. He doesn't scream. The dog tilts its head, then opens its mouth. Its lips don't move like a person's. But the voice that comes is real. Soft, ethereal. It doesn't echo in the room. It echoes inside Owen's chest. Dog VO, there's a baby. Beneath the mango tree. Owen blinks, but his expression doesn't change. Dog VO canted. The storm didn't bury them, not yet. But they won't last. You must go. The dog walks slowly toward Owen. Its paws don't touch the ground. The fog thickens, winding around the boy's ankles like vines of smoke. The voice becomes quieter, more urgent. Dog VO. Don't let them disappear. Don't let them go silent. Don't let the wind carry them away. Owen takes a slow step forward. He reaches out, hand trembling. His fingertips brush the dog's fur, and the dog vanishes. Interior Owen's bedroom. Morning. Owen wakes with a gasp. His skin is cold. Damp. His hair is slicked to his forehead. He sits up, eyes darting. The room is empty. But by the windowsill, muddy paw prints, small and white, led from the window toward his bed. Exterior front yard. Moments later. Owen's parents are packing boxes into the back of a van, still tired, still distant. Owen walks outside, barefoot, pajamas soaked from the wet grass. He points at the fallen mango tree. Owen, there's someone there. His mother doesn't turn. Mom. Inside Owen. You're gonna catch cold. Owen, under the tree. His father glances over, wiping sweat from his neck. Dad, what are you talking about, buddy? Owen's voice doesn't rise. It's flat, calm. Owen, a baby, under the tree. That stops them. His mother slowly lowers the box she's holding. Mom, what did you say? Owen, there's a baby. The dog told me. His mother kneels down in front of him, brushing mud from his leg. Mom, sweetheart, there's no dog. You're just scared. It's okay. It was just a dream. Owen doesn't look at her. He's still staring at the mango tree. Owen, it wasn't a dream. He starts walking. Exterior tree site. Moments later, rain starts again, thin but persistent. Owen kneels beside the roots of the fallen tree. He begins to dig. No shovel. Just his small hands pushing through wet clay, broken branches, soaked leaves. His father follows, confused and frustrated. Dad. Owen, come on, buddy. What are you doing? There's nothing there. Owen doesn't stop. Owen. I have to find them. His mother runs over, holding her phone. Mom. He's just reacting to the storm. It's trauma. He's not well, Tom. Owen's hands are caked in dirt. His fingernails bleed. He's trembling, but not stopping. The rain intensifies. A moment of silence. Then a hollow sound. His fingers tap something hard. Plastic. His father goes pale. Dad, wait. They dig faster. Branches snap. Roots pull apart. And then a flash of fabric. Blue. A valise. Torn. Dirty. But closed. Owen stops. Looks up at his mother. Owen, they're here. She opens the case. A gasp. A baby. Wrapped in layers of old cloth. Alive. Barely breathing, but breathing. And there beneath the case, stuck to the muddy bottom, is a single tuft of white fur. Enter small temporary bedroom. Morning. The pencil scratches quietly across paper. Slow, deliberate strokes. A small calloused hand fills the corner of a page with soft lines. Owen sits cross-legged on the floor, a worn spiral notebook open in his lap. The pages are crinkled and damp at the edges, smudged with fingerprints and sleep. His eyes never blink as he draws. He's focused. Too focused for a 6-year-old. The image forming beneath the pencil is unmistakable, a dog large and ghostly. Its fur drawn with quick looping lines to capture a shimmer. The eyes are left blank wide and watching. There's a wind curling around it, lifting its fur like it's alive. Beneath the dog, Owen draws a tree broken split, and beneath it, something small hidden. A shape inside a box. Interior kitchen. Minutes later, Owen slides the notebook across the counter to his mother as she sips weak, instant coffee from a cracked mug. Owen, he came in the dream. He wasn't mean, he just whispered. His mother stares at the drawing, her lips tightening. Her fingers trace the edge of the notebook without turning the page. Mom, Owen, honey. We talked about this. Dreams don't mean. Owen, he told me there's a baby under the mango tree. She sets the mug down a little too hard. Coffee sloshes over her fingers. Mom, you've been through something scary. Everyone's been through something. Storms mess with people. That's all it is. Owen doesn't argue, doesn't cry, just stares at her with a patience that unnerves her. Owen, he had white fur, eyes like the moon. He talked without opening his mouth. His father enters, drying his hands with a dish towel, catching only the tail end. Dad, still talking about that dog. Mom, he drew it again. Says there's a baby buried in the yard now. His father exhales long and slow, the kind of breath that carries weight. Dad. Owen, listen. I know everything feels upside down right now. You're scared, we're all scared. But we checked the yard. There's nothing there. You understand? Owen slides off the stool, picks up the notebook, and turns to leave. Owen, I'm going back. His mother glances at her husband, who shakes his head, already done with the conversation. But Owen stands by the door, staring at the handle like it might open itself if he waits long enough. Mom. Owen, no. We're not going out there again. It's soaked and dangerous, and Owen. He said if I don't go now, the baby goes quiet. That silences the room. Dad. It's just a tree, son. Owen, no, it's not. Ext yard. Late morning. The sky hangs low, thick with quiet tension. The storm has passed, but its breath still lingers in the air. The air smells of metal and leaves. Owen leads the way across the lawn, stepping carefully between broken shingles and sloshing puddles. His small hands clutch a red-handled trowel barely big enough to dig through a sandbox, let alone a tree's grave. His parents follow behind, reluctant. Exhaustion trails behind their every step like invisible chains. They stop at the fallen mango tree. The gnarled roots are coated in wet mud. The bark is peeled in places, revealing deep, wounded wood. One thick limb rests partially submerged in the earth, like it was driven down with force. Mom. You see, Owen? There's nothing here. But he doesn't listen. He drops to his knees, pressing his palm to the dirt, as if listening for a heartbeat beneath. Owen here. Dad. Owen, please. But the boy is already digging. The tiny trowel bites into the wet soil with soft squelches. Clumps of black earth fly behind him. It's slow. Painfully slow, but he keeps at it with a rhythm that feels ritualistic. Mom. You can't let him do this. This isn't normal. Dad, he'll wear himself out. Let him see it's just dirt. The rain begins to fall again, light barely a mist at first. Then thicker. Owen doesn't flinch. His knees sink deeper into the mud. The rain soaks his hair. His shirt turns the notebook in his back pocket to pulp. His breathing becomes labored. Dirt under every fingernail now splinters in his palm. Still digging, Owen to himself. He said not to let the wind take her. Thunder grumbles. His father walks over, kneels down beside him. Dad. All right, that's enough. Let me help. He pulls at the trowel gently. Owen yanks it back. Owen, no, I have to. He came to me. Not you. His voice isn't angry. It's quiet, heavy, measured. Dad? Owen. Suddenly a sound. Faint, muffled, but real. His father freezes. Mom distant, Tom. Another sound. A cry. Thin, weak, like breath stretched too far. Mom running over, was that? Owen, she's still there. Owen's digging intensifies. He throws the trowel aside now, using his hands. His father joins him, no longer questioning, shoving away clumps of mud branches' roots. The earth resists. Then the tip of a zipper, coated in brown, stuck between tree roots. They dig faster, tearing the mud from it. The handle of a valise emerges. An old one, cracked leather softened by water. The zipper gives way with a wet snap. Inside, bundled cloth and a sound. A real soft, undeniable whimper. They pull the cloth back, revealing a baby. Alive, barely moving. Lips, blue eyelids fluttering, but alive. Owen stares at her, unmoving mud streaked across his cheeks like war paint. His mother collapses to her knees, scooping the infant into her arms. Mom, oh my God, she's alive. His father yells, something calls for an ambulance, maybe. Everything becomes noise, except for Owen. He doesn't move, doesn't speak. He turns to the hole where the bag had been. Carefully, gently, he reaches into the mud. His fingers close around something soft. He pulls it out, a tuft of white fur soaked through and speckled with earth. It glows faintly in the gray light. Not like it's reflecting light, like it remembers light. Owen doesn't smile. He doesn't cry. He just closes his hand around it and whispers, Owen, thank you. Owen's fingers dug deeper into the mud, cold, thick, grainy like coffee grounds soaked in oil. His breathing was shallow, yet steady. The rain had turned into a steady whisper, now falling in vertical lines, pinning everything beneath a soft gray curtain. His parents had stopped speaking. His father knelt beside him, elbow deep in dirt, knuckles scraped and stained. His mother hovered, close arms crossed tightly across her chest, her mouth half open like she might scream, but didn't. Her eyes never left Owen. Then Owen's hand jerked back. He blinked hard, not from pain but recognition. There it was again. That texture, not earth, not wood. Something different. Soft, but not alive. He stared at his fingers. Clumps of soil slipped from them. Beneath the crust was fabric, a deep blue canvas, waterlogged, ribbed. The edge was folded, stitched. His fingers shook as he pressed them against it again. It was real. He looked up. "Owen, there's something here." His father scooted closer, leaning in. Owen stepped back, kneeling in silence. The man dug faster now, moving with the kind of urgency that comes when the brain starts catching up to the gut. He found the handle first, a brass loop, dull and cold. Then the edge, a zipper track crusted with dried clay. He tugged. The mud pulled back reluctantly, oozing out between the teeth of the old zipper as he forced it open. What emerged was a valise, not luggage, not a backpack. Something else, something deliberate. An object meant to conceal, to be tucked away and forgotten. Its corners were frayed. A leather strap clung to it by threads. Faint outlines of stickers once lived on its surface, now long washed away by rain. Mom quietly, "What the hell is that?" His father said nothing. He stared at the case like it might bite. A long second passed. Then he moved. One hand on the base, the other gripping the strap, he pulled it from the earth. It came free with a wet squelch, sending ribbons of mud cascading into the hole. The ground filled in behind it like the earth was trying to keep its secret. He laid the case on the wet grass. Rain pattered against it. Owen watched breathless as his father reached for the zipper. It was silent save for the slow slide of the metal teeth unfastening. Skirk! Halfway through, a sound emerged. Muffled, fragile, a whimper, not from any animal. A cry, faint, weak, but human. Time splintered. Owen's mother dropped to her knees beside the case, ripping it open before his father could finish. And there she was, a baby wrapped in damp, balled-up cloths. Blue and cream layers of what looked like an old blanket, rags, even a kitchen towel. Her skin was pale but flushed across the cheeks. Her tiny hands moved once, then twice. Her mouth opened, let out another cry, louder this time. Her eyes were closed, but her lungs still remembered how to scream. "Mom." Oh my God. She lifted the infant slowly, almost reverently, pressing her against her chest, shielding her from the rain. Her shoulders shook, a sudden storm of sobs breaking through her as the child wailed louder, more alive by the second. "Mom," through tears. She's breathing, Tom. She's alive. His father was frozen eyes wide and hollow, staring at the baby like she'd appeared from another dimension. Owen stood completely still. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He stared at the valise. He could still hear the dog's voice, echoing quiet but clear. "Don't let the wind take her." The child's cries pierced through the yard, cutting across the soaked grass louder than the rain. Dad fumbling with phone, I need to call someone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped the phone twice before managing to dial. His mother rocked this baby slowly in her arms, her mouth close to the child's ear, whispering nonsense words, without meaning, just sound and breath like a lullaby trying to soothe the universe. "Owen, there's something else." They didn't hear him. He crouched next to the hole. The mud had collapsed slightly, filling in where the valise had been. But Owen could see something, just beneath the spot where the case had rested. It shimmered. He reached down, fingers sifting carefully through the mess, his hands now moving more delicately, like he was searching for something alive. And then he pulled back with a soft gasp. In his palm was a tuft of fur. Small, white. Not quite wet, just damp around the edges. It looked impossibly clean despite the mud. It shimmered faintly. Not with moisture, with something else. The strands were unusually long. Each one curled softly at the tip like feathers, but fine like hair. They glowed under the gray light, not reflecting it, but containing it. He stared at the fur like it might breathe. Owen softly, he was here. His father hung up, pacing back and forth, muttering into his phone, giving the address, describing the scene, confirming the baby was alive. But Owen just stood over the tuft in his hand. A low wind passed through the yard, and just for a moment, just a second, he swore he heard it. The faintest bark, one breath long. The trees around them didn't move, but something in the grass did. Exterior house front. Moments later, a neighbor's screen door slammed somewhere down the road. People were starting to emerge, drawn out by the siren call of chaos. First one, then two, peeking through blinds, opening gates. And then the distant wail of sirens. Owen's mother waved both arms, still holding the child. The baby had quieted now, just a low murmur from her lips, her cheek pressed to the woman's shoulder. Mom, to Owen's dad. How long was she down there? How could she have survived that? Her husband shook his head. Dad, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. She wasn't hypothermic. There's no cuts, no bruises. Mom in the rain. Tom the rain. She should have drowned in that mud. Owen walked toward them slowly, holding out the tuft of fur. His mother turned. Owen, this was under the baby. She took it confused. Her wet fingers turned it over once, twice. Mom, fur from what? Owen didn't answer. She looked at him, long searching. Like maybe he knew something she couldn't ask. Mom, quiet. Was that from your dream? Owen only nodded once. Her hand trembled slightly. Interior ambulance. Minutes later, the back doors flung open, and 2 EMTs jumped out. Oxygen towels, a heated blanket all at once. They took the baby with quick, gentle hands, nodding and murmuring to one another, professionally calm, but unmistakably shocked. EMT 1. She's cold, but not hypothermic. Breathing's shallow, still responsive. EMT 2, to Owen's mom. You found her. How long had she been? Mom, he did. She pointed to Owen. Mom counted. He said there was a baby. In a dream. A white dog told him. The EMT paused, nodded, but didn't speak. Because what was there to say? Exterior yard. Aftermath. Police arrived shortly after. Tape was drawn. Photos were taken. Neighbors gathered. Questions, so many questions. Who would abandon a baby during a storm? Why there? Why like that? And how had she survived? No one had answers. The forensic techs looked baffled. One officer pulled Owen's father aside. Officer, do you have any dogs? Dad. No. Why? The officer held up an evidence bag. Inside was the tuft of fur. Officer. We found this under the case. Doesn't match any domestic breed I've seen. Owen watched from the porch. Silent. His hair still wet. His shirt still muddy. In his lap was the ruined notebook. The drawing of the white dog now streaked and smudged by water, but the eyes were still there. Wide, glowing, watching. It started with one photo. A neighbor, someone Owen didn't recognize, had taken it from across the street, just as the paramedics lifted the crying baby from his mother's arms. The rain was still falling, but soft now, like the storm had turned to weep along with them. The photo caught everything in a single arresting frame. A soaked child wrapped in cloth, a boy covered in mud, hands still stained from digging, and a collapsed mango tree behind them, like some twisted monument. By morning it was everywhere. Boy, claims dog in dream. Led him to abandoned baby, 6-year-old. 6-year-old becomes hero after rescuing infant buried beneath fallen tree. Divine intervention or pure instinct. Queensland family, torn between wonder and worry. The headlines were endless. Local news vans crowded the narrow road. A drone hovered briefly over the house until Owen's father came out and threw a wrench at it. People started leaving flowers, teddy bears, little rain boots. Someone nailed a wooden cross into the spot where the suitcase had been found. They called it a miracle that a baby had survived under layers of soaked dirt and cloth. A miracle that Owen, just 6 years old, had known exactly where to dig. A miracle that the tree hadn't crushed her outright. But Owen didn't call it a miracle. He called it a message. Interior Local Community Center. 2 days later, the town mayor, the police, even a child psychologist had gathered a community roundtable to calm the attention spiraling around Owen's family. But the cameras kept coming. The lights were bright. Too bright. Owen sat on a metal chair at the edge of the stage, swinging his muddy sneakers, blinking at the flashes. His mother sat beside him, face powdered, but her fingers were white-knuckled on her lap. His father stood behind them, arms folded, watching the reporters like they were wolves, circling something small and bleeding. Reporter 1. Cheerful, forced Owen. Hi, buddy. Can you tell us a little about the dog you saw? Owen looked at her. He tilted his head like he was trying to remember something real that was already turning into shadow. Owen, he was white, big, not scary. He didn't bark. Reporter 2, interrupting. Did he have a name? Owen thought for a long moment, then shook his head. Owen, no name. He didn't need one. Reporter 3. Curious, so how did he talk to you? Did you hear him? Was it in English? Owen paused. Then he said something that none of them understood. Something that would be replayed 100 times across the internet that week. Owen quietly, he came from the wind. The room stilled. Someone coughed, and a camera zoomed in just a little closer. Exterior TV broadcast footage. montage. Clips ran in every format. Late-night satire shows replayed it. Talk shows invited experts in child psychology and dream symbolism. Religious forums debated angelic visitations. Paranormal bloggers posted maps connecting weather patterns, local myths, even ghost dog legends from the region. The dog from the wind trended on every major platform within 48 hours. Some said Owen was psychic. Others said he was lying. A few accused his parents of staging the whole thing for attention. But no one could explain the baby or the fur. Into a hospital room. Days later, the infant slept under soft white lights in a warm cot. Monitors hummed. A nurse adjusted a blanket checking vitals. Perfectly healthy. No trauma, no hypothermia, no injuries. The only oddity, a tiny pink birthmark on the back of her neck shaped vaguely like a feather. She had no name. No one had come forward. No missing persons matched. No DNA records flagged. It was as if she'd appeared from thin air. That's when they asked Owen. Interior kitchen table, night. The family was quiet. Dinner had gone cold. No one had really touched their food. Owen sat in his usual seat, doodling absently on a napkin with a green crayon. His mother watched him. Mom. They want to know what to call her. Owen didn't look up. Mom gently. You found her. You can name her if you want. He looked out the window. The trees were still. The world was holding its breath. Owen sky. His mother blinked. Mom sky. Owen, that's where he came from. She swallowed hard. Mom softly, okay. Sky it is. Interior Child Services office. Weeks later, the baby had no known relatives. No leads. No identification. It was a legal tangle, but ultimately the court allowed for local adoption. People lined up. Picturesque couples with glowing resumes and empty cribs. Smiling people who didn't really understand what they were asking for. But one couple didn't smile. They didn't bring resumes. They didn't have money or titles. They had grief and hope. They'd lost their child 2 years earlier, stillborn, never made it past the delivery room. They hadn't tried again. The pain had sealed that door. But when they saw the broadcast, they drove to the hospital without speaking. Just parked and sat there. The woman never said why she felt it. She just did. She walked in, looked at the baby, and whispered, I think we've met before. They were chosen the next morning. Exterior Owen's backyard. Late evening. Owen sat alone under the edge of the mango tree's broken limb. The town had refused to remove it, now deemed it a local memorial. People left flowers and toys at its roots. But Owen didn't want any of that. He sat with his notebook, the pages now crisp and new. The old one had turned to sludge in the rain. He drew sky this time, not the baby. The word. He drew clouds curling like spirals. A figure standing in the wind. A dog curled at its feet. Then, a shape. An infant cradled in a tree's roots. When he was done, he closed the book and pressed it to his chest. And somewhere far off, maybe only in his mind, he heard a bark. Low, proud, and gone before he could trace it. Into your new home. Sky's new family. Night. They named her Sky legally, as per the boy's suggestion. She slept soundly most nights. Smiled easily. But occasionally, just before dozing off, she would open her eyes wide and fix them on a corner of the room. Not in fear, in recognition. She would giggle sometimes at nothing at all. Her new mother once swore she saw a trail of paw prints across the wooden floor, white and wet. But they vanished before she could call anyone. Into Owen's bedroom. Night. Owen lay awake, again. His hands rested over the notebook, but his eyes were on the window. The wind picked up. Branches moved. He sat up slow. Outside in the yard, just at the tree line, a glimmer of white. Too far to see clearly, too faint to be certain. But he knew. Owen whispering. You're still watching her, aren't you? No answer. Only wind. But that was enough. The wind in Queensland had changed. It wasn't louder. Not colder. But it had taken on a voice, a texture. Like something inside it was trying to be heard again, if only someone would stop and listen long enough. Exterior schoolyard, late afternoon. Sky ran barefoot across the grass behind her elementary school. Her laugh was quick and sharp, like bells spilling from a bucket. Her hair whipped behind her in messy golden ribbons, and her backpack bounced against her shoulders as she chased after a falling leaf. She wasn't chasing it, because it mattered. She just liked how it danced. Other children called her odd. Not cruelly, just matter-of-factly. She talked to animals, stared at the sky a little too long. Said strange things when she was sleepy. but her teachers loved her. She always knew the right answers, except to the questions they didn't ask. Sky stopped at the edge of the playground, breathless. She turned slowly, sensing something. Wind brushed her shoulder, not harsh, just enough to make her skin lift in goosebumps. She looked toward the line of eucalyptus trees at the far edge of the fence. The branches were still, but in her chest, a familiar flutter bloomed. Sky, quietly. He's close again. Into your Sky's bedroom. Night. Her room was full of stars. Not real ones, but glowing decals, drawings taped to the ceiling, a mobile made from string and paper planets. Her adoptive mother said she loved the sky before she could spell it. Now at 7, she could spell anything. But the name still made her pause, because she hadn't chosen it. A boy had. A boy with mud on his cheeks and a quiet that felt deeper than silence. She sat on her bed, sketching on a scrap of paper. Her legs swung back and forth over the edged toes, brushing the floor. The drawing was simple. A white dog. Not cartoonish, not cuddly. Something sleek, ancient. It had eyes the same shade as clouds, lit from behind gray, but full of light. The dog was standing beside a tree. A mango tree. She didn't know why she always drew that tree, but it came out of her hand, without asking. She heard footsteps. Quickly, she flipped the paper and shoved it under her pillow. Her door opened. Mom? Still awake, Sky. Sky shrugged. Sky. Just thinking. Her mother sat beside her, brushing hair from her face. Mom, you want to talk about it? Sky hesitated. Sky. Do you believe in dreams that come back? Her mother blinked. Mom, like nightmares. Sky. No. Like a place you go when you're sleeping, but it's not just pretend. It's there somewhere. Her mother smiled, soft and sad. Mom. I think sometimes dreams are how the heart remembers things the mind can't. Sky nodded, looked out the window. Sky. I saw him again, the white dog. He was standing in the wind watching me. Her mother froze just slightly, just for a second. Mom. The same dog? Sky nodded. Sky. He doesn't talk, but I know he wants me to follow him. Into Owen's room, same night. Miles away in another part of town. Owen sat at his desk, flipping through the tattered edges of an old notebook. The pages were yellowed, water damaged. But one image remained clear, a white dog drawn with the hand of a 6-year-old and the precision of memory. He stared at it now, at 13, taller, quieter than most boys his age. He had grown into his silence. It fit him now like a second skin. He wasn't weird. He was elsewhere, always half in the present, half in a wind that hadn't stopped blowing since that day. On his shelf were news clippings. He never asked for them. People mailed them to his family. Some were folded into letters, thank yous, Bible verses, confessions from strangers who believed he'd touched something divine. He never responded, but he kept them all. He traced the drawing with his finger, the outline of the dog's back, the curve of its neck. The eyes left empty. He'd tried to name the dog over the years, gave it titles, whispered ideas into the dark, but none of them fit. It wasn't something that could be owned. It wasn't a pet. It was a presence, a whisper that lived in the space between seconds. The wind blew outside his window, and like so many nights before he turned to look. Exterior small town street. Day. It was market day. People wandered between stalls of fruit, bread, secondhand books. The sun was bright, but not hot. The kind of day that made people feel safe. Sky walked beside her mother, holding a paper bag with apples inside. She stopped suddenly. Her eyes went wide. Sky, Mama? Her mother turned. Mom, what is it? Sky didn't answer. She was staring across the street at a teenage boy standing alone near the old hardware store, thumbing through a bin of screws. Brown hair, thin frame, a look in his eyes that felt familiar. Sky whispers, "That's him." Her mother followed her gaze. Mom, you mean Owen? Sky nodded. Sky, that's my brother. Her mother knelt down beside her. Mom, he's not your brother, sweet pea, not by blood. Sky didn't blink. Sky, he's still mine. Her mother looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and said nothing. Across the street, Owen turned, saw her, and for the first time in 7 years, their eyes met. Not as strangers, not as past and present, but as two souls caught in the same wind. Into a diner, moments later. They sat across from each other in a booth. Sky stirred a chocolate milkshake with her straw. Owen sipped a black coffee he didn't really want. Their parents hovered at the counter, pretending to give space, but listening to every word. Sky, do you remember the dream? Owen nodded. Owen, I never forgot it. Sky, He's been coming to me too, for a while now. Owen leaned in slightly. Owen, does he speak? Sky shook her head. Sky, not with words, but I hear him anyway. Owen, what does he want? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a scrap of paper, placed it on the table. A drawing, crude but clear. A tree, a baby, a white dog. Owen's breath caught. He reached into his own jacket, pulled out his old notebook, turned it to the same page. The drawings matched. Different hands, different years. Same vision. Sky's voice dropped to a whisper. Sky. He's coming back, isn't he? Owen nodded slowly. Owen, the wind never left. Exterior edge of town, sunset. The two walked together along a dirt path leading to the hill behind town. The sun was bleeding into the horizon, turning the sky into a watercolor of fire and ash. They stood at the top, looking down at the valley. The air grew still, and then a gust. Soft like fingers brushing their cheeks. Sky closed her eyes, breathed deep. Sky, he's near. Owen looked to the tree line. Nothing. But in his chest that old echo stirred again. The one that had never really stopped. Enter Owen's room, late night. Owen sat cross-legged on his floor, notebook open in front of him. Sky beside him. They didn't speak, just drew. Side by side. The same dog, the same wind. And as the clock passed midnight, they both looked toward the window at the same time. Outside, beneath the street lamp, standing just beyond the glow, a shape, four-legged, still, white, watching. The wind had grown louder in the last few days. It no longer whispered through the leaves. It scraped. It scraped across glass, across nerves, across the edge of thought, like something was sharpening itself on the bones of the town. Sky felt it first. Into her elementary school, day. She stood alone near the swing set, her sketchbook balanced on her knee. The other kids were shrieking over a game of tag, but she was focused drawing a tree she'd never seen. Tall, twisted, its bark peeling like paper. There was something trapped at its roots. When she shaded the bottom corner, her pencil halted. There, unbidden, she'd drawn a figure, a man, standing beside the tree, watching it. And in the man's arm, a bag. Long, heavy, dragging across the dirt. She stared at the drawing, the graphite lines vibrating under her stare. Then she heard a sound. Boots. Slow, deliberate. She turned her head slightly enough to see the man across the fence. Leaning, watching. He was tall, thin, wore a dark cap pulled low. His coat was too big for the warmth of the day. His arms were crossed, but as the wind blew, the edge of his sleeve lifted. And beneath it a tattoo, a wolf, mouth open, eyes wild. Sky's chest tightened. She didn't know why. But she closed the sketchbook and walked straight back inside the school. Into her kitchen, evening. Her adoptive mother stood at the sink phone tucked between her shoulder and ear. Mom. Yes? Yes, I understand, but that doesn't answer why there was a strange man loitering outside the fence. Sky sat silently at the kitchen table, spoon untouched in her cereal. Mom, frustrated. I'm not being overprotective. My daughter has told me 3 times now this man keeps showing up. You can't keep brushing it off. Sky's fingers gripped the edges of her seat. Sky, his eyes didn't blink. Her mother turned. Mom, what? Sky. The man at the fence. His eyes didn't blink, not once. I counted. Her mother set the phone down slowly. There was a long silence. Interior police station, next day. The officer scanned the sketch. Sky had drawn her version of the man by the tree. He tapped a pen against his bottom lip, then turned to her mother. Officer, you say the tattoo was a wolf? Mom, yes. Officer, we might have a match. There's a guy in the system named Silas Grigg. No formal charges, but he was questioned during the Lockyer Valley child trafficking investigation 3 years ago. Moved around a lot. Nobody's pinned anything on him, but his name comes up. A lot. Sky sat in the corner of the room, her hands in her lap, listening. Her eyes never left the photo the officer slid across the table. The man's face was half shadowed, but it was him. She felt it in her stomach, cold and deep. Into her schoolyard, 2 days later. The sky was cloudless. The wind was hot. Children poured out of the school building in laughing waves. Sky stepped into the sun, one foot carefully placed in front of the other, as if the ground might vanish if she moved too quickly. She felt it again. A watching. Her eyes flicked left. The street was empty. No one by the fence. No one behind the trees. But she knew. She knew. She didn't run. She walked. Quietly. Back into the building. But no one saw her slip into the back hallway. And no one saw the man in the gray cap enter through the side gate 5 minutes later. Inter-school office. 20 minutes later. Secretary calmly. We've checked both ends of the building, and she's not with any of her teachers. Could she have walked home? Mom snapping, no. Absolutely not. She never leaves without me. Sky wouldn't. She stopped. Her breath hitched. Mom quieter. Where's Owen? Enter Owen's room. Same time. Owen was staring at the window. The wind had gone still. The trees had stopped moving. And yet the sound came. Not outside. Inside him. A growl. Low. Familiar. His eyes fluttered closed and the image came crashing in. Dream sequence. Grayscale light. He was standing in a field tall grass. No sound. Then, the dog, the white dog, appeared before him. Closer than ever. He could see the coarse texture of the fur, the way it shimmered around the edges like it wasn't fully solid. It didn't speak. It barked once. The bark shook through him, echoed like a stone dropped down a well. The dog turned, ran. Owen followed. The trees grew dense. A shape appeared through the blur of motion. A shack. Wooden. Roof rusted. Hidden in overgrowth. Forgotten. The dog ran to the door, stopped, turned to look back, and vanished. Into Owen's room. Continuous. Owen jolted up, breathing hard. He grabbed his coat, rushed down the stairs. His mother shouted something. He didn't hear it. He was already out the door, already in the wind. Into your newsroom. Night. Breaking local girl Sky. Whitmore, age 7, has been reported missing from Harris Elementary School. Authorities are actively searching the area. The family, known locally from a miraculous rescue 7 years ago, has not issued a statement. The story spiraled fast, faster than last time. This wasn't a miracle. This was a nightmare. And everyone had a stake in it. Interior Police Command Center. Later that night, Owen arrived on foot, breathless, mud caked to his shoes. An officer blocked him at the door. Officer, you can't come in, son. This is an active investigation. Owen, I know where she is. Officer, what did you say? Owen, I saw it. In the dream. He showed me again. Officer, kid, this isn't Owen firm. There's a shack in the woods past Whistler Creek. Tin roof, rotten walls. It's real. She's there. Another officer stepped out, overheard. Second officer, did you say Whistler Creek? The two exchanged glances. Second officer to first. There's an old lumber storage shed out there, long abandoned. Some squatters were chased off it 2 years ago. The first officer hesitated, then turned back to Owen. Officer, you're riding with us. Exterior wooded area, Whistler Creek, night. The squad car lights painted the trees red and blue. They stopped just short of the tree line. The rest they had to do on foot. Owen led the way. He didn't ask permission. The trees swallowed them fast. No trails, just roots, thorns. But Owen didn't slow. He walked like he'd done this 100 times before, like the wind was drawing a map in his bones. And then through the dark branches, the shack, just like the dream. And from inside a sound, faint but real. Sky. The storm wasn't waiting anymore. It came fast, no warning, no mercy. Wind sliced through the canopy, whipping the trees into a frenzy of movement. Leaves scattered like broken glass. The forest moaned and bent, and the sky growled low and deep. Owen didn't stop. He ran, not with reckless abandon, but with precision, with knowing. The dream had already shown him this path. His body remembered what the brain had only glimpsed behind closed eyelids. Each twist and slope, each muddy ravine, each broken log was déjà vu painted in wet bark and shadow. Exterior wooded trail, night. The flashlight in his hand flickered, struggled, blinked into static, then came back. Its beam barely pierced the storm-churned dark. His boots slipped on the wet leaves. He caught himself with one hand, the other gripping the notebook jammed into his coat pocket, where the sketch of the shack was still folded like a talisman. Thunder cracked overhead. A burst of light split the trees for a single second, and in that second he saw it. The dog, white, towering, mid-sprint through the trees ahead. Its body moved like mist, with weight fur alive, in the wind legs brushing nothing but air. Owen's chest seized, but not with fear. With purpose. He pushed harder. Branches tore at his jacket. Rain stabbed down through the leaves. His hands were scraped, his breathing ragged, and still he ran. He didn't call for help. He didn't wait for sirens. There was no time. Sky was calling. Exterior old lumber shed. Night. Hidden in a clearing where the wind curved sideways and the trees stood like petrified ghosts, the shed waited. A remnant from a forgotten industry, half-collapsed spine, cracked walls streaked with rust and mildew. Moss hung from its roof like torn cloth. Inside, behind one rotted wall, Sky was bound at the wrists and ankles, her body curled on cold concrete, eyes wide in the dark. She didn't scream anymore. She was conserving energy, counting seconds, listening. Because just outside the broken door under the whispering rain, the man paced. He was muttering into a phone, words too low to hear clearly, but he was angry. She could feel it in his steps. Man into phone. The kid's worth more than this. You want her clean, you pay clean. Otherwise I vanish, and so does she. A long silence. He wiped his mouth, looked out into the tree line. Something had shifted. He turned slowly, squinting. Rain battered his face. Exterior edge of the shed. Night. Owen crouched low behind a fallen tree, soaked to the bone, heart pounding in his throat. He had seen the man through a crack in the shed's wall, heard the tail end of the call. Money, vanishing, her. This was real. More real than the dream, more than the dog. This was flesh, bone, steel. He reached into his pocket and closed his hand around the old drawing. The one with the dog, and the tree, and the girl in the ground. His fingers trembled. Another bolt of lightning tore across the sky, lighting the clearing in sharp, blinding relief. For a heartbeat, the shed and the trees turned to paper. And there, just behind the man, stood the dog. Not drawn, not dreamed. There, muzzle raised, teeth bared, still, soundless. The man didn't see it. Owen's breath caught. Then the dog barked, loud, piercing, impossible. The man spun, gun drawn, fired blindly into the trees. Bang, bang, bang. Nothing, only wind. The dog was gone. But Owen had already moved. Interior shed. Seconds later, he slipped through the broken panel on the east wall, silent as the rain. Sky turned eyes wide. He dropped beside her, knife already out. She didn't ask how he found her. She didn't need to. Sky whispers, he's close. Owen, I know. He sliced the rope at her wrists first, then her ankles. Her hands were numb. She winced. Sky. You saw the dog? Owen nodded. Owen, he led me here. Sky reached for him, and just as their hands touched, the door slammed open. The man stepped inside, eyes bloodshot, shirt clinging to him like a second skin. He didn't speak. He just raised the gun. Man, you shouldn't be here. Owen stepped in front of Sky. Hands up. But his eyes didn't leave the man's. Owen, she's not yours. The man's lip curled. Man, neither is she yours. Blood don't lie. Owen's voice shook, but it didn't falter. Owen family does more than bleed. It shows up. The man moved fast, grabbed Sky by the arm. She screamed. Owen lunged, but the man shoved him hard, sending him crashing into the rusted shelves. He hit the ground, dazed. Sky kicked, bit, fought, but the man hauled her toward the door and froze. Because standing in the doorway now was the dog, white, soaked, massive. Its eyes glowed. Its body hummed with a presence too big for the space it stood in. The man blinked, and the dog growled, low, rumbling like thunder under the bones. Man to himself, no. He raised the gun. The dog didn't move. He pulled the trigger. Click, no bullet. Again, click. Owen rose behind him, wielding a rusted crowbar from the shelf. He swung. Crack! The man collapsed. Gun skittered across the floor. The dog vanished. Sky ran to Owen, threw her arms around him. He held her close. His hands still trembled, but the crowbar didn't drop. Exterior shed. Moments later, sirens howled in the distance, getting closer. Owen led Sky out into the clearing. They walked slow, side by side, into the flood of lights and shouting voices. Officers surrounded the building. Medics rushed in. Owen didn't say anything. He just looked up. And high in the trees, caught in the stormlight, a shimmer of white fur turned slowly, then disappeared into the dark. Rain tore through the forest like teeth. Sheets of it fell sideways, slashing through the leaves. Thunder bellowed above like something ancient waking in the sky. The trees leaned against the wind, their limbs groaning, as if they too were trying to escape. Abandoned shed, continuous. Owen crouched low behind a crate. His breath caught in his throat. The flashlight in his hand flickered again, barely illuminating the ground before him. Water dripped from the rafters onto the concrete floor, forming small puddles around his shoes. Sky lay near the back wall, bound with coarse rope, her eyes wide but alert. She was no longer afraid, just waiting. Waiting for him. Owen moved. Quiet. Careful. He slid across the floor like a shadow, 1 foot at a time, every breath timed with the wind that howled through the broken wall. Sky watched him, eyes locked on his face. When he reached her, he didn't speak, just nodded once. Her hands were tied tight behind her. The rope bit into her skin. He took out the rusted utility blade from his coat pocket and pressed it to the knot. The door creaked. Owen froze. Footsteps. Heavy. Wet. Getting closer. Sky's lips trembled, but she didn't make a sound. The rope gave. Owen slipped his hand around her wrist, pulled her gently to her feet. Man OS. Thought I heard breathing. He was near. Too near. Owen grabbed Sky's hand, yanked her behind the stack of crates just as the man entered. His boots were soaked through, jeans stained with mud blood on one sleeve. The gun in his hand drooped at his side, but his eyes were sharp. He sniffed, turned slowly, and then he saw it. "The cut rope," man sharply. "You little piece of—" He lunged forward, knocking over a metal drum. The crash echoed like thunder inside the shed. Owen and Sky ran. Exterior forest, night. They burst into the downpour, stumbling over roots and slick moss. The forest swallowed them whole. Behind them, the man roared. "Manos, you think you can run from me?" Lightning lit the world white. Owen's boots skidded on the wet slope, pulling Sky behind him. Branches tore at their clothes, slapped across their faces. They didn't stop. They didn't dare. The wind screamed louder, bending trees sideways. The ground turned to swamp in seconds. And then a bark. Owen whipped his head. There between the trees, the white dog, clear, solid, real. It stood just ahead facing them, eyes glowing like twin moons. Then it turned and ran. Sky gasping, "He's leading us." "Owen, follow him." They chased the dog through the woods. It didn't run fast, just enough to stay ahead, always visible, always waiting. Behind them, the man cursed, crashing through the trees with violent, reckless speed. "Manos, you don't know who you're messing with." "That girl's mine." Sky stumbled. Owen caught her. The wind picked up, nearly knocking them off their feet. Ahead, the dog paused at a fork in the path, left a steep ravine, right a fallen log crossing over a gully. The dog darted right. They followed. Halfway across the slick log, Owen felt the wood shift. Sky slipped. He caught her wrist, yanked her forward just as the man's foot slammed onto the other end of the log. The dog stopped, turned, watched. And then the tree above them groaned. Owen looked up. A massive branch fractured from the wind, strained against its last thread of bark. The man didn't see it. He was on them now, gun raised. "Man." Breathing hard. "You should have stayed in the dirt like that baby did the first time." Owen stepped in front of Sky. Defiant. Broken. Ready. Then, snap, the branch gave. It crashed through the air like judgment. The man looked up too late. The branch struck him with bone-breaking force, smashing him against the side of the ravine. His body disappeared beneath a landslide of splintered wood and soaked earth. Silence. Only rain. Only wind. Only the soft sound of Sky crying, not in fear, but relief. Owen turned to her, pulled her close, held her tight. Owen softly, "You're okay. You're okay now." She nodded against his chest. "Sky. He saved us again." Owen looked up. The dog stood on the ridge watching. Then it turned and vanished into the storm. Rain was still falling when they found the man's body, half buried in mud ribs, crushed beneath the fallen branch mouth, frozen mid-scream. His eyes were open wide, locked on something no one else could see. The paramedics covered him gently, as if afraid to disturb the thing that had already claimed him. But the forest didn't care. It had taken what it wanted and gone quiet again. Interior Police Department. 2 days later, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, pale and sterile. A stack of folders sat on the desk in front of Detective Hale, their corners softened by fingerprints, rain, and time. He flipped through the latest report, his jaw clenched. Detective Hale to himself, "You son of a bitch." A name scrawled in ink across the top of the folder, Silas Grigg. The dead man. His background had taken days to unravel. Fake addresses, burner phones, stolen IDs. But one fact remained solid. 7 years ago, Silas had worked as a freelance delivery driver under an alias. Mostly regional runs, small packages, early mornings. Nothing that raised eyebrows. Until someone remembered him showing up near that stretch of road during the cyclone evacuation week, right around the time Sky had been found under the mango tree. Hale voice rising, "You were there." He stood gripping the folder like it might bleed. Interior interrogation room. Later, Owen sat beside his mother. Across from them, Hale dropped the folder onto the metal table. "Hale, he was the one. Silas Grigg, we're certain of it." Owen didn't react at first, but then his eyes lowered. Owen quietly. "He put her in the ground." Hale nodded. "Hale. He had no record, no DNA on file. But this confirms it. His vehicle was seen circling your neighborhood days before the cyclone hit. Same truck seen near the edge of the mango orchard 3 hours before the storm surge." Owen's mother paled. "Mom, why bury her alive?" "Hale. We don't know. Maybe he panicked, maybe something scared him. But that's not the strangest part." He reached under the folder, pulled out a small plastic evidence bag. Inside it, the tuft of white fur. Hale counted. "This is what was found under the case. We sent it in. Forensics ran it against every known breed in the country. He paused, looked at Owen. Hell can't. It's not from any animal in Australia. Owen blinked, Mom softly. What do you mean? Hail. I mean, it's not just unclassified, it's impossible. Under the microscope, the fiber structure doesn't follow known biology. It's hollow like polar bear fur, but denser. Doesn't decay, doesn't absorb heat. And get this, it reflects light differently. Like it's not made of keratin at all. Owen said nothing, just stared at the white strands inside the bag. They still shimmered even beneath the plastic. Hail. Lowering his voice, I had them send it to CSIRO. A guy from the Animal Genomics Division called me personally. Said if it hadn't come from a crime scene, they'd call it a fabrication. Mom's shaking her head. What does that mean? Hale sighed. Hale, it means whatever left this fur doesn't exist. Owen reached for the bag slowly. His hand hovered just above it. Owen, it was never meant to exist here. Into Sky's room that evening. Sky sat on her bed legs, curled beneath her, her drawing pad open in front of her knees. She was sketching again. Not from memory, from feeling. A house with no walls. A wind that lived in its windows. A face in the clouds. And always the dog. This time she gave it wings. Not like a bird. Not feathered. But something. Woven from air. Thin. Veiled. Like threads of light tied into form. She added trees behind it. Tall and familiar. Then she stopped. Her pencil hovered. She looked over at her closet. Open. She hadn't left it that way. Sky stood padded across the room in bare feet and peered inside. Nothing, just clothes, shoes. The drawing from the day she met Owen still pinned to the inner wall. She was about to close it when she heard a bark, soft, distant. She turned to the window. The trees in the backyard were still, but in the wind, she felt it again. Not presence, gratitude. Interior town hall. Press conference, day. Reporters shouted over one another. Microphones clustered around the podium. Cameras zoomed and flashed, casting light on tired eyes and too many unspoken things. The mayor cleared his throat. Mayor. We can confirm that the man responsible for the attempted abduction of Sky Whitmore and likely her abandonment as an infant is deceased. Thanks to the brave actions of Owen Lark, now 13. Sky is safe and reunited with her family. He gestured to Owen, who stood off to the side, uncomfortable in the spotlight. A reporter raised her voice. Reporter. What about the rumors of the phantom dog? Locals are saying the children were guided to safety by some kind of mayor quickly. That's speculative at best. We appreciate the imagination, but this is a real-world incident involving criminal activity. Owen lowered his head slightly, but a small smile tugged at his lips. Interior Police Forensics Lab, night. A young technician stood in front of a screen, squinting at the magnified image. Side-by-side comparisons of dog fur from various breeds glowed on one side. On the other, the strand from the evidence bag. He tapped a key. Ran a test again. No match. Another. No match. He leaned back, muttered under his breath. Tech to himself. Either someone's breeding alien dogs, or something's walking around out there that we've never cataloged. Behind him in the lab's holding fridge, the fur still shimmered faintly in its case. Into Owen's room, late night. Owen sat at his desk, flipping through the notebook again. He'd drawn the dog over and over through the years. But now, he stopped at one sketch, the very first one. The one from the night it all began. He pressed his fingers to the edge of the page, tracing the fur, the eyes. Owen softly, thank you. He turned out the light, crawled into bed. Outside the wind picked up again, but this time it didn't howl. It sang. The sky was a soft gray stitched with light, and the wind rolled gently over the grass like it was smoothing out a story that had been wrinkled too long. The mango tree had changed. Its broken limbs had been trimmed but not removed. Its trunk split and regrown, now leaned in a new direction, one born of survival. The bark had scarred over the wound, but the wound still remembered. So did Owen. So did Sky. They stood together in the silence. The world behind them was buzzing again. News recovery people calling it all a miracle they could finally swallow. But here under this tree there was only truth. And truth didn't shout. It settled. Sky held the evidence bag in both hands, the tuft of white fur still faintly glowing despite time and exposure. It hadn't degraded, hadn't dimmed. It felt alive. Owen knelt beside the roots. The same spot. The exact place where 7 years ago his fingers had brushed fabric and saved a life he hadn't even known belonged to him. He pressed his hand to the dirt. It was warm, familiar. Sky knelt beside him. For a long time they said nothing. Only the wind spoke, moving between the leaves above, like a breath caught in prayer. Then finally, Sky softly, "Do you think he was real?" Owen looked at her. She wasn't asking like a child anymore. She was asking like someone who had been touched by something that logic couldn't wrap its arms around. Something bigger than rules, bigger than time. Sky counted. "The dog, the white one, who do you think he was?" Owen looked down, thought, then said without hesitation, "Owen, I don't know, but I know what he did." She watched him. Owen counted, "He kept you alive. He led me to you. Twice. Maybe more." He took the fur gently from the bag fingertips, grazing it like it might vanish. Owen counted, "He didn't want you to disappear." Sky swallowed. "Sky, why me?" Owen turned the question over in his mind. He didn't have the kind of answer people wanted on TV. The kind that made them feel smart or safe. He only had this. "Owen, someone loved you. So much they wouldn't let the world forget. Even if it had to send that love through a dream. Through wind. Through whatever that was." Sky blinked hard. Her voice was quiet. "Sky, you think it was someone who knew me?" Owen paused. "Owen, I think it was someone who refused to stop knowing you." Sky didn't respond right away. She just leaned her head gently against his shoulder. The two of them sat like that for a while, breathing in sync, tethered by silence. Then Sky picked up the small tin box they'd brought. They lined the inside with the piece of cloth from her old baby blanket, the one she'd been wrapped in when Owen found her. Now faded, torn, but sacred. Owen placed the tuft of white fur inside. He closed the lid. Sky pressed her fingers to the top. Sky softly, "Thank you for not letting me go." They dug a small hole beneath the tree. Together, hands in the dirt like before, but this time not in desperation. In devotion, in memory, in peace. The box slid into the earth with a soft thud. Owen covered it first, then Sky, pressing the soil flat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something else. His first drawing of the dog, carefully folded, protected for years despite the weather and time. He placed it above the buried box, tucked under a small flat stone. Not a gravestone, a reminder, a doorway. "Owen, wherever he is, he'll hear this." They both stood. The wind picked up, swirling gently around their legs, into their clothes, their hair. Sky smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was deeper. One of those expressions that come from understanding something too big for words. She turned to Owen. "Sky, you're not just my brother." Owen met her eyes. "Owen, you're not just my sister." She nodded. "Sky, we're wind-marked." He exhaled. "Owen, we're remembered." And somewhere far above, a break opened in the clouds. A shaft of sunlight cut through the gray landing exactly on the spot where the box was buried. Just for a second, just enough. They looked up, and in the corner of their vision, at the edge of the field, a flash of white, a tail disappearing into the tall grass. No sound, no footprints, but in the hush that followed the wind, brushed past their ears like a whisper. Not from outside, from inside. "She's home now." Owen reached for Sky's hand. She didn't need to ask if he'd heard it too. The forest breathed. It didn't move with urgency anymore. No thunder, no storm. Just the slow, steady rhythm of leaves nodding in the breeze and trees creaking like old bones, shifting in their sleep. Sky stood at the edge of the clearing where the light came down soft through the canopy. Her feet were bare. She liked the feeling earth between her toes, the moss cool and damp like memory. Her arms were tucked behind her back. Her hair moved in strands across her face, caught in the wind that came and went without reason. Owen was a few steps behind her. He didn't rush her, didn't speak, just watched. Sky raised her chin, letting the wind wrap around her shoulders like a scarf made of breath. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, her voice came not loud, not performative, just true. "Sky, softly. Sky's still here. Thank you for bringing him to me." The wind curved, as if it heard. She smiled and turned to Owen. He stepped beside her, hands in his coat pockets, eyes narrowed toward the distance. The air around them shimmered, just slightly mist curling at the edges of the forest, catching sunlight like spun glass. Sky to Owen. "Do you think he's gone now?" Owen didn't answer right away. He tilted his head to listen, not to the sounds of the forest, but to something underneath. That low, quiet music that had been in the wind since they were children. "Owen, I think he was never really here the way we are, and he never really left." Sky looked down at her own footprints, the soft indents in the wet soil. "Sky, it feels different now, like I'm not being followed. I'm being held. He nodded. Oh, and maybe that's what the wind does when it loves something. It doesn't chase, it carries. She reached out and took his hand. He let her. They stood like that for a moment longer, long enough to let the past exhale. Then Sky turned toward the trees. Sky, let's go. They walked shoulder to shoulder, deeper into the forest. Not aimlessly, but without urgency. The kind of pace you keep when you know the world will wait. Light filtered through the branches in shifting patterns, dappling their faces with gold. The path was barely visible, but their feet knew it anyway. It was the same one from the dream, the same one the dog had run down. Now it was just a trail of wind and shadow. Then, just as the trees began to close in around them, and the clearing behind slipped from view, Sky looked over her shoulder and froze. Sky, whispers Owen. He turned. There at the very edge of the mist, barely touching sunlight, the white dog, still, watching. Its fur shimmered like snow caught mid-air. Its eyes reflected the world deep and clear, and full of something that felt like memory and prophecy all at once. Sky didn't breathe. Owen stepped beside her. Sky, softly, he waited. Owen, he always does. The dog took one step forward, then another, then stopped. It turned its head toward the trees, as if listening to something far away. Then it ran, but not toward them, away, into the mist. Its shape blurred, faded, and then it was gone. Not like a ghost, like a promise kept. Owen placed a hand over his heart. Sky copied him. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. They turned forward again, the wind pressing gently against their backs. Not pushing, guiding. The trees whispered around them. And in the hush between footsteps and breath, something deeper stirred. Something ancient. The wind still blew, and somewhere just beyond the veil of what eyes could see, the dog ran on.